Very pleased once again on the warning to be joined by the congressman from the 10th District of the Empire State of New York, Dan Goldman. Welcome, Congressman.
Thanks so much for having me, Steve. Great to be with you as always.
Let me ask you a question about the forthcoming impeachment, kangaroo court, debacle, disgrace, whatever it is you wish to think of it as, that the country will be subjected to regarding the president's impeachment by the radical Republican House. Why is the president being impeached? And I ask that very narrowly. What if you were the spokesman for the Republican cause here, right? Tell me why they're impeaching the president of the United States.
Well, the real reason why is because Donald Trump wants them to, and they operate at his direction. He controls.
What would they say? What would they do? What is it before we rebut it? What is it they are alleging at the core here?
So the allegations are somewhat convoluted, in part because they change seemingly weekly because there is no actual evidence to support them. But what they are essentially saying is that Joe Biden knew, I think the best case scenario is Joe Biden assisted his son to use Joe Biden's power and connections to benefit him financially with business dealings around the world. And that, I cannot even say this with a straight face because this was entirely debunked and delegitimized during the first impeachment where I was the lead counsel. But they're going back to this Burisma allegation that then Vice President Biden encouraged Ukraine to fire its prosecutor general while Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma. It is, in fact, the exact opposite. And we had so many witnesses in that first impeachment who testified to this, who were Ukraine experts, who were on the ground in Ukraine, in the embassy, who knew in great detail everything that was going on. And they all said that the reason why not only Vice President Biden, but official U.S. policy, a bipartisan group of senators, the EU, the IMF, everybody wanted this prosecutor general to be removed because he was not prosecuting corruption, including Burisma. And now there's evidence during this investigation from Devin Archer, who was Hunter Biden's business partner and was also on the board of Burisma, that Burisma believed that prosecutor general Shokin was helpful to Burisma because he was corrupt and that his removal was bad for Burisma. So the only real evidence of Joe Biden's involvement in any official action that has any tangential connection to Hunter Biden was actually bad for Hunter Biden.
So I think this is a very important point here as we continue on in the conversation. And I want to put a pin in it. There's no actual evidence as described by what we would consider as evidence in this country, going back literally to the colonial era. There is hearsay, there is smearing, there is accusations, there is wish casting. There's even the reality that, and I know that you are in this camp, that I don't want to see any of the highest leaders of the country's kids working for any foreign companies, right, doing any type of lobbying across the board. But that being the case, Hunter Biden is not alone in that, A. And B, there's no evidence whatsoever of there being any proof, written, email, electronic, direct testimony at all. Am I correct about that?
You are correct. One of the problems that I think we keep running into is, well, I don't know that's a problem. One of the things that the Republicans are doing is they continue to cite the types of evidence that they have. So they will say, we have bank records, we have emails, we have testimony, and it all shows that Hunter Biden was engaged in all of these crimes. I mean, Chairman Comer goes on television and starts accusing Hunter Biden of committing the crime of a FARA violation, failing to register as a lobbyist, of money laundering, of these very serious crimes. Now, I was a federal prosecutor for 10 years. I charged those charges. There's nothing remotely close to any evidence to support that. But what they do is they go from the types of evidence to the charges without actually specifying any direct, credible evidence linking the two.
So I want to stop right there because I want to go slowly through this before we kind of quicken up the conversation, because I think this is important. If you were sitting in the Congress in 1974 and you were a Richard Nixon dead ender, I'll never vote to impeach the president, it certainly would have been over a fact that would be indisputable by both sides, that there are recordings, there are tapes, and therefore evidence, right, that some of us think are grounds for high crimes and misdemeanors. You go forward to Bill Clinton, and you look at, though it was approached with tremendous hypocrisy, right? There's an actual argument to be made, right? President lied under oath, no matter what side you're on. In this, and I think we're across an important line. Tell me why I'm wrong here. Am I watching the state, the powers of the state, be directed against citizens of the United States by elected office holders abusing their power? Am I watching an abuse of power with regard to Hunter Biden and the Justice Department? Because truthfully, I don't understand why the tax delinquency for Hunter Biden seems to be treated as a crime uniquely among 340 million American citizens, just like the gun crime or charges. And secondly, right, you have a chairman of a congressional committee, Comer, who routinely makes criminal allegations as a committee chairman investigating matters of fact. And you have all of this playing out at a moment when Donald Trump, who commands everything behind the scenes, is promising mass deportations, concentration camps, and the locking up of political prisoners. So before the hurricane reaches the shores, the weather picks up. And I guess, unimpeachably so to me, what I'm watching is the levers of the state, the power of the state, the substantial powers of the legislative branch, the Justice Department, be leveled in a way that is indisputably, it seems to me, singular, venomous, directed for political purposes at the president, but more ominously, the destruction of his surviving son, who is a larger societal matter, no matter what it is that he has done, we should all want him to live in grace and recovery. Or at least I thought that's what
And he's never been a government employee.
He's never going to be a government employee. He's never going to hold elected office. He's never going to hold the position of public trust, but it doesn't mean.
And never did, by the way.
Right.
Unlike
never did.
Trump children.
And well, he was an officer in the U.S. Navy, and he was forced out, but he will never hold a position of public trust. So we should, decency. We have a lot of people recovering from addiction in the country. You want people to be able to contribute positively, and certainly as a guy in his early 50s, he has a lot of room for that. But am I watching right that something that was impossible to conceive of growing up? That am I watching the state target and attack a citizen who happens to be the president's son with kind of a reverse fortunate son syndrome, where we're going to come after your family? This is the mob era of politics, isn't it?
It's shocking and startling, and I think you capture it very well. This is truly the weaponization of the federal government by the House Republicans. And the irony, of course, is that they created a subcommittee called the Weaponization of the Federal Government, which has not uncovered any weaponization of the federal government during the Biden presidency, although we have touched upon a lot of weaponization during the Trump presidency. But this is absolutely abusing their power for purely political purposes, and in an effort not just to muddy up the president, but to actually imprison a private citizen. And the House Republicans wrote a letter to Hunter Biden's judge urging her to reject his plea deal. That is gross improper conduct for the legislative branch to try to interfere in an ongoing prosecution in the executive branch, in the Department of Justice. And it is slanderous, for sure, because it is so baseless and frivolous. And because whatever Hunter Biden may have done, and there's no question that he engaged in misconduct, the Department of Justice did an investigative colonoscopy on him for 5 years. And we had testimony in the Oversight Committee. They interviewed over 60 witnesses. They got hundreds of thousands of documents. And I can tell you that for a $2 million tax fraud investigation, that is a tremendous amount of resources. That is a lot of time.
It cost, if you had to put a number on it.
It's hard. I mean, I don't know how you measure it, but I mean, it was thousands of man hours. Thousands of man hours. And they ultimately concluded that he did not commit a FARA violation, that he was not lobbying on behalf of anybody, even though he had business interests overseas, and that he was not money laundering, and that he was not doing any of these other crimes outside of the possession of the gun and the potential tax fraud. And so he should be dealt with. I mean, the Department of Justice should do it. I do think that the Republicans have had an influence on undoing the plea agreement, which, by the way, was only different because of Hunter Biden's concern that Donald Trump would become president and would retributively and politically prosecute him. But there's no evidence connecting any of that activity to President Biden. And we've been doing this a year. They will claim this week, Steve, the Republicans will claim that they need an formal impeachment inquiry because they've been, quote, stonewalled. I can tell you, because I led the impeachment of Donald Trump provided 0 documents to the impeachment investigation. 0. The Biden administration has provided close to 75,000 documents from the archives, 2,000 pages of Treasury reports, FBI documents, more than 10 government witnesses. They've obtained 36 or 7,000 pages of bank records. There's no dearth of material. There's just a dearth of inculpatory evidence. And they are trying to use smoke and mirrors and to gaslight the American people into thinking that because they either have a lot of documents, that Joe Biden did something, or that because a couple witnesses, lower level witnesses at the Department of Justice, whose bosses have already testified, are not being allowed to testify, that somehow that's obstruction. There's no new evidence here. From the first impeachment hearing in September, where their own witnesses, the Republican own witness, Jonathan Turley, who has turned into a complete hack for the congressional Republicans, even had said himself that there is not insufficient evidence to move forward with impeachment. And yet here they are moving forward with impeachment, even though they have gotten no new evidence. The only evidence that they have cited since then are loans that Joe Biden gave to his brother and his son, and that were paid back.
Let me ask you this question, which is that new Speaker of the House, and I don't say this in a recriminatory fashion, but he believes and has said, right, people and dinosaurs walked around together a couple thousand years ago. Somebody asked him, what do you believe? He points at a Bible and he says, everything in that. Just did an interview where he's not Aaron, but instead Moses, leading his people out of the promised land. And I wonder how this implicates the impeachment. Is he a guy who believes the ends justify the means? Or is he someone who simply will believe anything and is addled enough to chase down every conspiracy, down every rabbit hole, and is a nut with power who lives in an alternate reality? What is the zeitgeist in the House Republicans right now? Is it a vengeful bloodlust where we're out to get them for cynicism and power? Is it a real devotional cause, a religiously tinged effort to fulfill God's word, as they are about to invoke on the great kangaroo court of early 2024 on the unjustified impeachment of a president directed from Mar-a-Lago? What is the zeitgeist inside the House Republican conference right now when you see your colleagues?
Well, I think you have to frame it with the understanding that this Republican majority has arguably been the most inept majority in the history of the House of Representatives.
That's saying something, and I just, as a historical matter, right? It is almost certainly true, because
we obviously had the removal of a speaker, but they have not passed on their own any bills that have become legislation other than a continuing resolution, a few smaller, I mean, there are plenty of suspension bills, and the bill to lift the debt ceiling, but they cannot pass their own appropriations bills. They cannot pass anything that is going to get passed by the Democratic Senate and signed by the president. They have done nothing to help the American people, and they show no signs of being able to, because they do not even bring substantive bills to the floor anymore. So because of that ineptitude, they are trying to distract the American people through the investigative pathway. through a complete bogus sham impeachment that they hope will take all the headlines, that will provide fodder for Donald Trump against President Biden, and that will hopefully, in their mind, give them something to talk about that they did. Because right now, as Chip Roy said on the House floor, he doesn't have one thing to point to that this Republican Congress has done. And so they are in a pickle because they can't actually help the American people. They can't lower costs. They can't create jobs. They can't, they really can't do anything that makes the lives of the American people better because they're unwilling to compromise. And therefore, they're trying to distract with this gaslighting and this bogus investigation. And there's no evidence and there's no basis to move forward with an impeachment inquiry. And it really sullies a very, very precious power in the Constitution, the impeachment power. And, you know, you pointed out the Nixon impeachment, the Clinton impeachment lying under oath. You know, in the Ukraine impeachment, we had 17 fact witnesses come in, testify under oath, and painted a very clear picture that Donald Trump used his power, abused his power as president for his own personal partisan gains. And you can, you know, come up, you can say, oh, that's not a high crime, that's not a misdemeanor, but it was a fact-based investigation that very clearly showed, as many Republican senators who even voted to convict him said, that he abused his power. But that was based on evidence. That was not based on allegations. And right now, if you look at the evidence, Joe Biden did nothing wrong, much less a high crime or misdemeanor.
I want to ask you one last thing. If you sat down with one of your Republican colleagues, and maybe it's completely hypothetical in that it's not a person you can sit down with on the Chip Roy wing, the Marjorie Taylor Greene wing, but you just said at a human level. And boy, there's a lot of people in this country that have an addicted relative in their families, right? It's tens of millions of people. And you just said to them, what do you want? He never served in government. How long do you want him locked up for? Do you want him to pick up a crack pipe again? Do you want him to go back down the addiction rabbit hole? Are you hoping that he kills himself? Would that satisfy you? What do you want as an outcome, right, from all of this, from Hunter Biden? Like, what will satisfy you in terms of his destruction? Right. And I asked that sincerely in a disoriented way, right? It's that they're coming after him. He's a person in life who's privileged in one way, but has suffered greatly. He's had a lot of problems, right? I mean, if there's a target for destruction, right, like someone you just want to get and just burn down, I don't understand why the impulse would be to make it Hunter Biden, but apparently it is. But do you have any sense, right, at a human level, from within inside that, what would satisfy them? What do they want? What does victory look like to them?
Victory for this Republican Party is power. It is political power. That is all that they care about. And they will use any means necessary, including to try to destroy a private citizen who happens to be the son of the president, whose brother died, whose mother and sister died in a car crash when he was a baby. His brother died of cancer, which led to a lot of his addiction problems. And it's all for political purposes. Now, if you actually were to put, so the Republicans on a lie detector test, I think some of them would absolutely be true believers. And, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a true believer. What you see on TV is what you see behind the scenes. But there would be a lot of Republicans who would acknowledge that, and there are a lot of Republicans who acknowledge that this investigation is a failure, and that they would recognize that the means justify the ends if it means that Donald Trump wins the presidency and if the House Republicans can hold on to the majority. Any means necessary.
I just want to close it by saying what Congressman Dan Goldman has just said here is extremely important. And I urge everybody who hears it to understand it and to spread it. What they're doing demonstrates fearlessness, and it's a warning. And it's saying, you oppose our quest for power, we'll destroy you. Look what we did to the son of the president of the United States. And if we can do it to him, we can do it to you, to anyone you love, to anybody you care about. This is intimidation. It is wrong. It is un-American. And it is contrary to every spirit of Americanism, of fairness, of justice that there has ever been. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you'll come back and keep us updated, because this is as much a psychological thriller as it is a political one, where the stakes are extremely high heading into a year that I think is going to be as momentous a year in this country's history as we've had in a very, very long time.
You put it very well, Steve. That's exactly right. And it's always a pleasure to chat with you. I think the perspective that you bring is incredibly important because you've been on all sides of this, and you've seen this Republican Party transform from the grand old party to a MAGA party that is unrecognizable. And I believe that we need to cut the head off the snake, and I don't mean that literally, but that figuratively, Donald Trump needs to be removed from public life once and for all. And I'm optimistic that once that happens, that the rest of the snake can over time shrivel up and we can get back to disagreeing about policy, but all focused on doing what's best for America. And that is not what this Republican Party is right now.
Congressman Dan Goldman, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so you never miss a video. Also, for more content just like this, please consider joining our Warning Premium community. You can find out more in the description below.